Happy Friday, guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Dubs. I'm your host, Bill T. Well, 6 weeks to go until one crazy weekend here, October 6th and 7th, hosted at the Orleans Hotel and Casino, brought to you by Findlay Volkswagen and plenty of other sponsors. Findlay Volkswagen is our title sponsor, and we appreciate their support. So if you're looking for a new Volkswagen, go down to Findlay Volkswagen and pick you up a new VW. So only a little bit of time left until you can book your rooms. They will stop pre-booking the room September 15th. So make sure you get your room booked before then. We've already sold over 200 room nights. The place is going to be packed, jamming. And I wanted to clarify some questions that people have hit me up with. And those questions are, what is the cost for the event? Friday night strip cruise, parking lot hang, meet and greet, all that, no charge. Come to the Orleans Hotel after 4 p.m. on Friday. Hang out with all of us there. It's going to be a great time. Saturday morning is the car show. The car show, there's top 20 cars and best of show. That's $30. The poker run, which takes place Saturday afternoon at 5:30, is $50. $40 to $50, you get a t-shirt, a poster, some stickers, and a chance to win your portion of $2,000 in cash money that we give out. We're always looking for extra ways to give away some money, so there could be a couple of wild cards in there. Notwithstanding that, that's the rundown of the show. For more information, for your room discount codes, all that stuff, I'm not going to tell you again. Don't DM me, go, where do I go? Send me the link. Go to letstalkdubs.com. Click on the link that says Showtime. All the information's on that page. Pick it out. If you're a vendor and you want to be there, vendor spaces are $60, $50 or $60. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but they are there on the website. If you're a vendor and you want to set up your stuff for the car show and have it out there all day Saturday during the poker run and all that good stuff. So that's the information on that show. Don't forget to support our sponsors that help bring you Let's Talk Dubs. That's VW Trends Magazine. It's a magazine for the people, by the people. Lots of cool how-tos, plenty of technical articles. They've also got water-cooled cars in the magazine as well. So VW Trends, like no other magazine in the VW scene that's out today. Go check them out. Subscribe today at vwtrendsmagazine.com. That's vwtrendsmagazine.com. And I can't leave out our boys, Jared and Jason with Ross Wolf. High quality aftermarket parts made for enthusiasts by enthusiasts. Guys with a passion for the business that decided to get into the aftermarket parts game. And they make some high quality stuff. Some really cool things. Viton reusable gaskets for your oil sump plate. Locking dipsticks. Velocity stacks. Pulleys. All kinds of stuff. Dash deck lid hinges. You've got dash bus repair pieces or covers for your knackered up dash in your bus. Go get yourself dialed in. Go check them out at rosswolf.com. That's rosswolf.com. Today's podcast, Squeeges Kustoms. You may have heard of him. They've been in contention quite a few times for the American Most Beautiful Roadster and actually won it once before. Squeege just happens to be the name of Doug Jergers' dad. Doug took over the shop after the old man retired. That's when Doug took it over. But the VW part starts when Doug's just a kid moving out from Ohio and Dad hooks him up with some Volkswagens and he gets the VW in his veins. That's when Doug's car graced the cover of August 1990 Hot VWs magazine with his cover car that's raspberry and pink with splash graphics on the bottom and color matched 5 spokes. This car's got all kinds of custom tricks straight out of the hot rod world. And it was one of the coolest cars on the scene. You get to hear that story, plus the story of how he got into Volkswagens, as well as what it takes to run a custom shop these days. And you heard it here first, November 17th. Make sure you guys get down to Squeeges when he does tacos and nitro. And they're going to have a bunch of nitro cars firing off, free tacos and food and all kind of stuff. So it's a big open house over at Squeeges Custom. It's going to be November 17th down in Chandler, Arizona at Squeeges Custom. So make sure you check him out, support him. And it's a great podcast. VW guy to the core. I'd love to see him get a VW one day. You never know. I might help facilitate that. I know he's got 50 projects stacked on deck, but listen, you could always use one more. So without any further ado, guys, let's get into it this week. We talk custom cars, we talk Volkswagens, and we talk Doug Jereger, the cars he's built, and the time he's been in the VW scene, as well as America's Most Beautiful Roadster and building full-blown custom show cars. Let's get into it this week. Doug Jereger from Squeeges Custom, Chandler, Arizona, on Let's Talk Dubs.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.
Okay, everybody. So on today's podcast, I've got a longtime VW enthusiast who started out in the custom car building game into Volkswagens. The name will be familiar with you if you're into any kind of hot rods and things to that extent whatsoever. He typically puts a few cars in the running that are always going for some of the AMBR awards, which is America's Most Beautiful Roadster. He's known for building roadsters, custom cars, everything from A to Z. And so on today's podcast, I've got Doug Jerger with Squeeges Customs out of Chandler, Arizona. Doug, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be on.
Hey, Doug. So the way we always start the podcast is because, so where people may be familiar with your car, especially if they've been on Bob Daniels' page of the cars, the custom cars of the 80s and 90s. In August of 1990, your 56 Bettle was on the cover with kind of a two-tone paint job with some, it looked like a splash graphic coming across the bottom.
Yeah, August 89.
Yeah, so August of 89. So with that being said, knowing that you cut your teeth on VWs as you kind of went into the hot rod world, we always start the podcast with the same story. What's your VW story, and how did you get into Volkswagens?
I've always been, everything's just been cars all my life. My dad, when growing up, I lived in Ohio. I was born and raised in Mansfield, Ohio. And Dad had the custom shop there. And, of course, he would drive home different stuff that I can remember. But anyhow, he divorced my mom, moved to Arizona in 74. He opened the shop in 64 in Ohio, moved it in 74 to Arizona. But he's always been a bug enthusiast himself. He had a couple Bajas when he moved out here. He had a red Baja that was off-road, jackman wheels, that kind of shit. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was more of a street Baja. It was lowered, a lowered Baja with 3.5-inch center lines on the front and 10-inch on the back kind of thing. And anyhow, so I've always kept really close with him. In Ohio, when I was going to school, it was all about cars. That's all I ever thought about. And I would ask him, it was getting time to where I could get my first car. I think I was 14. And he suggested I get a VW Bug.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think if you don't have any money and you want something cool that you can work on and actually do a lot with, a VW Bug is the way to go. So I worked on a farm in the summertime and then part of the winter. I had saved the shit out of my money. And I was able to buy a 61 rag top, soft top Bug from a guy down the street. It was all original. I can't remember what I paid for it. I probably paid too much for it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was under $1,000, but back then I didn't have any money. So I got that, and from the age of 14 all the way to the age of 17, I did nothing but work on it. I didn't really drive it much. I think I'd probably put 50 miles on it since I just worked on it. And it wasn't like any of the Bugs you guys seen. I was, growing up in Ohio and high school and that, it was always, if you were a car guy, you'd show up at school with a Camaro or Chevelle, a Mustang, something like that.
Right.
And once they found out I had a Bug, of course, all the gearheads were making fun of me because it just wasn't that popular in Ohio as it was here in the West.
And I'm sure they're pretty rusted out there.
Well, this one was extremely rusted. So it got, underneath the body mount, above the torsion housing, all that was gone. The back of the floor was so gone, I just cut it out and left it out. And then I was in auto mechanics in high school, so I was able to build an 1835 for it. I think that's the largest you can go without boring the case, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's, I think 1641 slip in big bores, but yeah, there can the 1835 was your standard, but the slip in big bores is 1641 typically.
Okay, this one was an 1835.
Yeah,
and I always wanted dual carbs on it. Couldn't afford any of the Webers or anything like that, so I made custom intakes out of sheet metal and tubes and shit, and put these two Ford two barrels on it, and they never worked. I never got them to work, and eventually I merged it into a 4-barrel, and it had a 4-barrel on it because I just didn't know, right?
Sure.
So Dad, I think on my birthday, sent me a set of moon discs. So I put moon discs on it. A buddy of mine, Dad, was a painter. He painted it yellow for me. It was the first flame job I ever put on a car, and it was just terrible. The whole thing was just awful. It was so rusted, I could lift up on the left rear fender and the driver's door would open. It would twist that much. I mean, it was just, but it's all I had. It's all I could afford. And I just, more than anything, I enjoyed working on it. After school, go home, and we had this barn, and I would go, I mean, it could be freezing fucking cold, and I would be out there doing something to it.
Right.
So it kept me busy throughout high school. And of course, when I graduated high school, 2 weeks later, I had moved to Arizona to go to work in Dad's shop.
Now, what was that like going from Ohio to Arizona?
It was magical. I mean, that's all I've ever thought about, being young, that I wanted to move to Arizona because I had visited quite a bit. My brother and I would come out from the 70s and the 80s. We would visit Dad they would send us out during summer break. The hottest part of the year. I don't even think I'd ever visited when it was cool, but back then you never really knew that it was hot. I think our tolerance levels were a lot different. Like when I moved out here, Dad still had the lowered, it was like a French Racing Blue, light blue Baja Bug, 65 steel sunroof with the center lines. And I fell in love with it, and I had to pay him weekly for it.
The old dad tax, huh?
Yeah, but Dad, he wasn't lenient. First of all, I got paid minimum wage at the shop, and that was $3.20 an hour. I mean, I know it sounds like I went to fucking school uphill in this blizzard and all that shit, but this was real. I mean, I didn't make but minimum wage. I had to pay him weekly for the car.
Yeah.
So that didn't leave me a lot that I could do to the car. I mean, the car was a running, driving car. But I was just in love with that bug. It was a bitchin' little bug. In fact, if I had ever build another Beetle just for the hell of it, I'd probably just build that again. I think that would be a cool little bug to drive around back and forth to work.
Yeah. And so you've moved now to Arizona. You're starting to work in the shop with the old man, and you just you're kind of, at this point, you're kind of a backyard skilled guy, like doing it yourself, nobody around in Ohio to kind of show you the ropes. And when do you run across your 56?
Well, I had the blue lowered Baja for a couple of years. And my skills had gotten so much better by going to work at the shop. I mean, I remember the first couple of days, Dad wasn't there. He was running the Hot Rod Connection in a shop he had in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And he had a guy running the body shop in Mesa, and he just assumed I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. But anyhow, I sharpened my skills that whole year. So it was staying at the shop late and driving that bug. Well, we used to cruise Central every Saturday night. There are two places in Arizona when you're growing up in the 80s that you'd go to: the river on the weekend, and then or like during the day, and then at night you'd go cruise Central, Phoenix.
Right.
And it was a huge cruise spot. So I'd go out there just by myself. I didn't really know anybody yet, so I would just go out there and cruise. And it was about 1 a.m, and I think I was making my final pass, and a couple teenagers in a rental car turned in front of me, and I T-boned them and just totaled the bug. So with the money they gave me, down the street from the shop, there was a 56 Beetle for sale. It was dark green, bone stock, but it ran. So I think I paid $1,500 for that and started driving it. And later that became the pink car.
Now, when you went to build that, I mean, that car has quite a few custom mods, especially for, I mean, you're in your early 20s building that car.
Yeah, well, that would be, let's see, I was 18 in 86. Yeah, early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I guess. Yeah.
And I mean, that car had some pretty custom mods done to it. I mean, obviously working in the hot rod shop, your skill set kind of pushes you more towards hot rodding. And it's funny because at this time in the VW world, there's a lot of hot rod influence coming into the VW scene with, you know, the graphics, color matched wheels. And then I know on your car, you had the 39 Ford taillights and you had Frenched headlights.
Right. I took and welded the headlight rings on and made the bucket come apart or come out from the back.
And that's, I mean, it's quite a feat to do on Volkswagens. When you're looking at the competition back in those days, like the other cars in the scene, are you looking at stuff and thinking to yourself like, man, these guys aren't doing anything custom. They're just repainting it, putting it back together. And I'm going to show these guys what custom's all about. Or did you just have
I was just excited to work on it and do whatever I wanted to on it. Cause this was, you know, the Baja was already done when I got it and I didn't really do much with it, but this was an opportunity to, you know, the couple of years that I've learned to do things that, you know, learn to weld, learn to do body work and paint and that kind of thing. So yeah, I was just excited to just customize it, you know, and back then anything goes, right? It wasn't like it's a 56 oval is sacred. You got to leave it all kind of stock looking, but slammed. So, I mean, I shaved the dash and one of the hardest things I did, it doesn't sound like it would be hard, but the drip rail on the cowl in front of the hinges.
Yeah.
I cut that and welded it, but what I discovered, it was very difficult to weld because that's where they crimped the sheet metal together. When they did, that stretched the sheet metal super thin. So it was just a nightmare to weld solid. And then the back, I tapered them above the deck lid. And then, it's like the wheels. So the paint scheme, my dad kind of talked me into that. An article came out, I can't remember what magazine, but Stanford had done some renderings for paint ideas, and we got the idea off of that. And I remember I painted the car. So back then we were using Metal Flake brand candies, and it was Candy Magenta C10.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I bought like 3 gallons of seat. This was all lacquer too, by the way.
Right.
So I bought like 3 gallons worth of C10, Candy Magenta. And I remember cutting the top of a 5-gallon lacquer thinner can, pouring all those candies into that can, and then 1 pint of white paint. That was the formula on that color.
Oh, wow.
And I put 7 coats of that pink, and then, of course, 10 coats of clear, sand, another 10 coats of clear. So when we got it all done, or I shot it, and I got it all done, I just thought it looked too plain. So that's when Dad started suggesting the goofy splash thing going down the side. And then the wheels, I still wanted those polished, but I couldn't afford it.
So
I just couldn't afford it.
And so you painted them the contrasting color of the lower graphic part, the splash color, which the splash color was like is that just a not diluted raspberry? It's just more of a sharper raspberry?
I don't know what I did there. I think I took the pink that I had, and then I had maroon toner, lacquer toner I added to it to darken it. And then as far as all the paintbrush work, that was done by a lettering guy, Jack Dooney, local. And it's I wasn't crazy about it when it was all done. A lot of people liked it. I kind of wished I'd never put it on there, but it was too late. So, but I can tell you real quick. So I got the car all done, and I couldn't afford upholstery. And I took it to the first Bug-O-Rama, and they flipped out when they seen it, and they gave me first place, and I was stoked. In fact, one of the magazines And I'll tell you which one it is. They photographed me standing there with the trophy girls. Yeah, here it is. Here it's Hot VWs 89, February 89. And they showed me, because I had won first place, they're like taking pictures and shit, and I'm just super fired up. And there's no upholstery in it, right?
Yeah.
Well, there was a guy who owned a bug called Squeeges Candy. Do you remember that car?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he protested because he was all displayed out, and mine was just parked there. And his protest was I didn't have upholstery, which is fine. Right. And they gave the first place to him. So that weekend, when I got home with it, or I was living in an apartment next to the shop, I didn't want to park it next to all the cars in the apartment parking lot. So I kind of parked it at the end of the parking lot sideways and put my cover I had on it.
Yeah.
And later that night, me and my girlfriend came out of the apartment, and I noticed all these pink paint chips at the bottom of the covers. When I lifted the cover, the whole quarter panel had been caved in on the passenger side.
Oh, wow.
Where somebody had backed into it. So that was devastating for me. But fortunately, it turned out to be my neighbor down below. He says that one of his kids probably did it, and he wanted to know if his insurance had covered. And I said, absolutely. So I got an insurance check, and of course I repaired it.
Right.
But I used that money to have it upholstered.
Well, everything happens for a reason, right?
I guess so, man. And that, again, I mean, back then I didn't have shit for money. So it was anything I could do to do extra work or work on anybody's car that would pay me. It was all going right back into whatever car I had.
And now, and how long, so you end up getting the upholstery on this car, and then finally it's featured in the magazine. It's got like a nice Alpine stereo system in it. And
yeah,
it's got the Scirocco seats and all that. Now,
yeah.
How long do you, are you a kind of guy like you build a car and you keep it for a long time, or you kind of get tired of it and want to do something else?
I already got, by the time that car is finished, I already got in mind something else. I can tell you when they did that photo shoot, my dad was super strict about what time I would take off work, right?
Yeah.
Anytime I'd want to go on a vacation or anything like that, I had to wait till 5 o'clock before I could even think about leaving the shop. So this Hot VWs was out. Robert K. Smith was out at Hot VW, or Bugorama, and they seen, because this was after I got it upholstery, I had it at the next Bugorama, and he wanted to shoot it, and it was the next day on Monday, but my dad wouldn't let me take off work, so one of my buddies actually drove it out to the photo shop, or the stop, or the area where they did the photo. So I wasn't even present when they shot that. But another story with this one, this is the one I decided to drive it to San Diego. I had never been there. And when I put the car together, I pulled the fuel tank and painted it nice and all that, but I never boiled it out or anything like that. So on the way so it was San Diego, right? We're going to go on a Friday, 5 o'clock. I had to wait till 5 o'clock. My girlfriend and I jumped in the Bug. I thought it was cool at the time, the headlights, to use quartz headlights, because it just had that cool golden dim glow.
Right.
And that was great around town, but when you're out in the middle of the desert, it fucking sucked. I couldn't see 20 feet in front of us, right? So we're ripping towards San Diego, and that's about a 5-hour drive from the valley.
Yeah.
And halfway through that, it shut off. I mean, just stopped running. And I had a flashlight. I was trying to figured out it didn't have any fuel. So I shined a light in the fuel tank, and there's some blob of shit floating around at the bottom of the tank. And every now and then it would go over the pickup. And so what I did is back at the engine, I pulled the fuel line, and I blow air through it, and it would fire up. Well, shit, we did this like 7 times from getting all the way across the desert to San Diego, and it took so damn long. The sun was coming up by the time we made it to San Diego. But that was just that was like a long trip I took with a car, and it was just an adventure.
That's a serious commitment to get to San Diego, right? Like today.
Oh, yeah, I've never been there.
Yeah.
Never seen the ocean. I went, and again, I'm young. I have the opportunity to do anything I want, and that was one of my things I had to do. So.
And how long do you own that car for? Once it's finished?
I think I own this finished for like 2 years.
And then what happened to it?
I sold. I loved the car. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed driving it. Used to take it out at Central. Just had a blast with the car. A lot of memories. But I didn't have, like, my first apartment. I had a waterbed and a small black and white TV. That's all I had. Again, I wasn't getting paid shit. I didn't. And any money I had went into the car.
Right.
So I decided, we moved in, my girlfriend and I moved into an apartment together, and we didn't have anything. So I decided, I'm going to sell the car. And I had this great idea for a lower dune buggy, like a Manx style dune buggy. Mm-hmm. I'd seen, like, a local guy had one, and I really dug it. And so I sold the car, and I can't remember who I sold it to, but that guy eventually sold it to another friend of mine who I was able to see it and around town. But anyhow, I sold that, and that's when I bought that Manx style dune buggy.
Right.
and what was mind boggling about that, like, I sold the pink oval window for, I think it was $5,400.
Yikes.
But back then, that's like,
yeah, you cut a fat hog then.
Money I ever had. Right?
Oh yeah.
So, and then I was able to buy a TV and couches and shit I needed. And so I bought this dune buggy. Probably, I don't know, it was around $1,000, but, and immediately so it took me a little over a year to build that pink car. This dune buggy literally took me 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And it was awesome. And again, it was lacquer, and it blended from orange to yellow with some stripes on the side, lowered. And this was the one that Bob Daniels really liked.
Yeah.
And I guess I inspired him on his car, is what he says. But so that one took 6 months. And I remember driving that, and I had this conversation with a buddy. I'm like, man, I drove that thing for 2 years, and that means all the way through the summer, the monsoons. I remember it raining like hell. Never had a top for it, but it never bothered me.
Right.
It's like, the older you get, you got to have air conditioning. You got to, what I mean. But when you're young, it didn't matter.
Right.
And it didn't. It certainly didn't bother you.
Well, yeah, you're gonna drive it. You're gonna drive 14 hours to San Diego and blow the fuel tank backwards.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you don't turn around. You keep going.
That's it. So, yeah. So you end up with this buggy that you end up getting featured in VW Trends. I think that one's featured in.
Right. It was in VW Trends.
And but I mean, VWs kind of stick around for a while because you end up with some sand cars after that. And yeah, I mean, obviously living in the desert like we do, I'm in Vegas and you're down there. So we've got Dumont up here and you guys have Glamis down there. And it's like once you cross that threshold and you start messing around in the sand, it's a whole different ball game,
yeah.
Sand
certainly gets more expensive.
Oh yeah. And sand cars are just a straight blast, to be out there in the dunes.
It is.
And so you had also your sand car featured in Hot VWs as well, right?
I did. It was on
October 98 sand special.
Yeah, it was on the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I had since been out of bugs and shit since then, and was into hot rods, and a few of my friends were going to the sand dunes. I had quads, and I went down. And the first time I went to the sand dunes, I had a quad, and my buddy had a rail, and I took a ride, and I was hooked. I had to have a rail, so I came back, and that's when I started putting all the parts together for the sand rail I built. And of course, it had to be custom painted because I didn't want anybody to think that was just powder coated.
Right.
So all the welds were molded and shit, just over the top, just stupid.
Yeah, but I mean that's kind of what you do. And so with doing now let's talk about the business a little bit, right? So you end up working for your dad for how long until you find, and well, let's start with this. Where does the name Squeege come from?
Okay, so Dad, when he was born in Ohio, our background is Hungarian, German,
Mm-hmm.
Austria, and there's a neighborhood in Mansfield that all the Austrian and Hungary people lived. And when he was born, he was brought home from they lived in that neighborhood, and his grandfather said that when he cried, it sounded like a squeegee being dragged across glass. So it literally stuck with him since he was born, and junior high school, all the magazine articles that were on him early years, that was always his name, right? So
Right, it's funny. So that's where Squeege comes from. I dig it. So and then he ended up moving out to Arizona. So he started the shop in like Central Phoenix area, or where?
No, he opened it up in 1964 in Mansfield, and then 74 he moved to Mesa, Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
which he was on the corner of Extension and Southern. It was a house with a shop on the same property. So,
And so he was able to start just kind of going a little more full into, because he originally started out as a custom car painter, right? Just doing paint work.
yeah, that's mainly what he did, was custom painting, and then he'd build his own cars, right? His own custom hot rods and that. Then he was doing paint work, and other people wanted him to build cars. So occasionally he would build a car, but his mainstay was just paint work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and now he kind of rode that thing all through. We spoke a little bit earlier about during the 80s when when dealerships started kind of customizing cars.
Right. Yeah, he got hooked up with Tony Corey GMC, and they would give him, he would get like one or two trucks or Blazers or Suburbans, things like that. He got to paint down the center of the panels, the square bodies. He would do graphics, and I got hundreds of pictures of jobs that he's done, but that was his mainstay. This custom paint he would do on these brand new vehicles, and then on the side he would do show cars and race cars, that kind of shit, funny cars.
Now,
it was all lacquer days, right? And that was, you shot it without a mask, you shot it in the middle of the shop, no booth. It was just a whole different world.
And now what? So speaking of lacquer, like because we talked, you brought up lacquer a couple of times. Is everything now is water based?
No, a lot of the production shops have moved to water base. I think California, you have to use water base. Mm-hmm. In my shop, we still use solvent base. I have no interest in using water base. And from what air quality control says, that I don't think they're going to mandate it, so that's good.
Right.
But it's one of those EPA bullshit, just like the paint guns.
Right.
Everybody uses these HVLP gravity feed guns. When I grew up painting, it was a Bink 7, and that's all I painted with. And in fact, that's all I paint with now. And people think I'm just nuts, but all these paint jobs, these custom paint jobs I do, is all done with a Bink 7. I do clear coat with an HVLP just because it saves material, but all my color jobs are the old siphon feed Bink 7 dinosaur gun.
And you just kind of like the way it sprays a little bit better for you.
That's all I've ever known to spray.
Yeah.
I've tried HVLP, didn't like it. I paint all my candies, pearls, blends, everything with a Bink 7.
Yeah.
So it's one of those I transitioned from lacquer to base coat, but kept the gun.
Now, when you guys went from doing just paint work to starting to open up the shop a little bit, how did that transition take place, where you guys just started to take a little bit of everything?
Yeah, so Dad retired in 2004. So like 4 or 5 years before that, we got more and more inquiries on turnkey builds. Mm-hmm. And the last couple of years before he retired, I see him turning jobs away because he just didn't want to deal with them. Because we'd already had 2 or 3 in the shop, and he didn't want to do anymore. His plan was to retire. So towards the end, I kept track of or got the information of people that wanted their cars built, but Dad would turn it down. So when Dad, 2004, he built a home down in Hereford, Arizona, or Sierra Vista area,
Mm-hmm.
and which he's still down there now. And so he took all the equipment out of the shop, every last piece of equipment. He made me sign the lease on the building, and off he went. The only thing he left was this 4-post lift, and the only reason he didn't take it, it didn't fit in his new shop down there. So,
Well,
so
Dad's going to make you do it all on your own, one way or another, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's funny. It's some of the builders I've met today. I guess a lot of people thought he just handed me this fucking flawless, successful shop,
right?
And he just walked out, and it wasn't the case.
Well, yeah, you've got to build it. I mean, whether there's a change of the guard or everything switches out, you've got to end up continuing building the reputation, because you're only as good as your last job.
That's correct, and that's how you advertise yourself, is whatever your last job is will get you your next job.
Right.
You don't. I think when social media came, it created a lot of, I don't know, Facebook famous people where they go out and blow themselves how great they are, and then you go to these shows and go, what in the fuck? It looked good in pictures, but
right.
In real life, it's just terrible. I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that. But so when Dad left, I took out 2 credit cards and maxed them out and bought all the equipment I needed. I started calling all the people that wanted to build cars, got them to come back in, and then started hiring people and started growing. So I stayed in the shop we were in was in Mesa off of Broadway, and Dad was in that shop since 81, 82. And I went to work for him in 86. And then 2009, after the real estate crash and shit, I stayed alive. I dropped all the shop rates on all the customers to keep the cars going, which it worked.
Yeah.
And I found a new building, 10,000 square foot, which was twice what we had inside. So I was able to make a lease deal on that, and we moved in 2010 to it and where I'm at today.
Now, when you back in those days, and you've seen some change in the car customization world, right? You've been in the game long enough to see where it goes from, like, I mean, when someone used to want a top level show car that would go to all these, these indoor shows and things like that, that was in 1990, that was a completely different build than what you build today. Yeah,
you're right. A lot of trends change. Like, for instance, I had mentioned it was you just don't do those kind of things to an oval window bug, like shave the dash and mold the headlight rings, that kind of shit. But that's the type of cars we were around. I mean, that was the trend, that you could just customize the shit out of a car and it was great as long as it was low, right?
Right.
And it seems, I mean, I still dig the shit out of VWs. I'm itching. I'd really like to have another. But it seems like a lot of them being built today, they all just, one guy, a buddy of mine, he put it, and he's a VW guy. He says they're like M&Ms. You throw them out, they're all different colors, but the same piece of candy. So nobody goes and does that, as far as I know, go and do radical shit to bugs anymore. But that's kind of the way the hot rods are too. So, like, it used to be, you get a 34 3-window coupe, you'd hack the top, you'd smooth it out, take the hinges off, all this shit. But nowadays, you don't dare do that. It's the same thing. You try to, like, nowadays, if you got a stock roof on a 34, 9 times out of 10, they'll leave them just because, well, you don't see them unchopped, and it's more of a Jenny car, but it's just super low and super clean, right?
Right.
Which is great. I love it. It's just different trends. That's all.
Yeah. I personally, my attitude is on it, because I know that you work with Buddy down there, and Buddy's got my split window at his shop, And my split window is like,
how long has he had that?
It's been a little bit, but it's
Buddy does incredible work. I remember hearing about Buddy at the old shop, because right next door to us was Doug's Bugs and Bunnies.
Right.
And of course, I stayed up in the VW world just by after work going next door and drinking a beer with him and just being up to date on everything.
Yeah.
But you always heard about Buddy and his paint jobs and that. And then when I seen him, it's thoroughly impressive. I mean, the work he does is, someone said once it was at the Grand National, we had that split window over there for a Sloniger. Mm-hmm. Somebody said, if he starts building hot rods, all you builders are fucked. So,
well, he does do a little obsessive on the attention to detail, and Buddy built a car for me previously, my 65 Type 34 Carmen Ghia, which I sold a little way ago. But I'm from the same school that you are, from the attitude of like, they built thousands of them, so to customize one, I think if a guy's got a vision and you want to kind of build it and see the look, I think, there's plenty of them. Like I said, my split window's got a shaved dash in it, and I don't need the starter button or all that stuff. And I'm looking. Man,
that's just unheard of nowadays.
Yeah. Well, some people are going to be okay to walk the line, and I'm one of those guys, because, in 1951 they built 100,000 of them. Right. So it's not like there's a handful. Now I've got a car I just picked up out of Brazil. They only built 18,000 of those in the 3 years they built them. But my attitude is it's going to get lowered. It's going to be modified, but it's so cool. It looks like a baby Maverick. So the Maverick by itself is not a great looking car, especially when it came out new. And now they've started to kind of find a little bit of appeal, because I remember seeing one at the SEMA show 2 years ago, and it was kind of it looked like it was built like for a road course kind of car, right? Like all stripped down inside. It just had a good look to it. And it's the same platform as the Mustang, but it's funny, as time goes on, some of these cars, I mean, you just can't, they used to be hideous back in the day. And when we talk about stuff like this, I just automatically think of like the Mopars, right? Back in the 70s, like you got a Mopar because you couldn't get a Chevy, is kind of the way the majority.
And they were fucking terrible. The quality of those cars were just awful.
And now they're some of the most expensive cars. And I think that's what kind of happens long term, right? Because they're so unpopular. People didn't keep them. People didn't save them. People didn't do all these things. And Chrysler tried everything they could, from crazy colors to all kinds of stuff, which then added to kind of the long-term collectability of them. And with you taking over Dad's shop and then turning it into like we're going to full build. What's the first build that you really take to the next level that you guys decide? Is it your idea to take it to the Roadster show, or is it the client's idea to take it to the Roadster show?
Well, the first car I took to Grand National was my own. When Dad was retiring in 2004, I was finishing up, or was in the process of building a 32 Roadster for myself. Mm-hmm. And, of course, when he was out of the shop, I found more time to work on it. Obviously, I was allowed to work on my own shit when he was gone, but I took it in 2008 to Grand National over in Pomona, and it competed for AMBR. Ken Diggett was there with another, I think it was a 32 Roadster, and that was before he got famous, but it turns out he's a VW guy too. So that was the first time, and then I was like, I was hooked on taking things to Grand National. So it turns out I only do one major show a year, and it is Grand National. I always make it a point to bring something to the show, whether we're competing for AMBR or just a new build that we had finished.
Now, I've seen on your site, there's a whole wide array of cars that you work on. Everything from, it looks like
our website needs updated. There's a lot more stuff than we finished that isn't on there.
Like top fuel bodies to Chevy trucks to, now the graphics, all stuff. Do you guys do the graphics in house now?
Yeah, I still do that. So that's, I got a couple guys that work for me that are painters. and they do a bulk of the paint work. But when it comes to either a full candy or graphics or a race car paint job, I do that, and that's where I get the most enjoyment, is able to being able to do those jobs, because typically the customer leaves it up to me, and I get the freedom of doing whatever I want. And in fact, I got a split window drag car in there now, Corvette. It's like a pro mod, and
nice.
I'm getting ready to paint it. I'm excited to paint it. And of course, I've already got, you figure out the paint scheme as you're working on it. But those type of jobs, I really look forward to doing, and I do them myself. But like, if we're doing just a metallic blue or a black or something like that, my other painters are excellent and very talented men handle that. So
now, if you, let's say, I recorded a podcast previously with Dave Kindig, hasn't aired yet, but when I was talking to him, and there's so many hot rod guys that started cut their teeth on Volkswagens, and I think it's because, obviously with VW guys, like you said, you don't have any money. You just buy this car that you can fix up yourself and do the work.
You don't have the money, but you have the passion.
Right. And I thought the coolest build off would be to get a bunch of hot rodders together and give everyone a Beetle and see what they do with the Beetle. Either do it your style or do it whichever way that you do it. If you were to get a Volkswagen, let's say you stumbled across another Volkswagen for a project, what kind of Volkswagen would you want to build for your next project?
That's a good question. I said earlier I wouldn't mind replicating that lowered Baja.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of those. Here in Vegas, it's funny because there's so many Bajas, and in the 80s, everybody's trying to do something different. And I remember one of the guys had a slam Baja, and it looks, as oxymoronic as it is, it was super cool to see it because it had the super deep wheels on it with low profile tires, and it just looked cool,
And I would probably do something like that. But, back to what you said, if we had the build off with all the other builders that were involved with VWs, I think it'd be interesting if you gave them a very small budget too, because that would be very much like what it was when we were starting out.
No,
right.
Yeah, I agree totally, because I think that's the core of, and what's been driving customizing Volkswagens for so long was like, usually it's people without very, very much means, and they have to get resourceful with what they have around, which is why you always see custom Volkswagens done so radically different. I remember even seeing one car at one time that had a shifter made from like a titanium hip joint. You know what I mean? Jeez. It was like, like the guy, somehow his dad or something was involved in the medical industry, and he made a shifter out of the titanium hip joint or something like that.
Wild.
And it was just like, but that's the story, right? It's like whatever they do, they kind of take whatever influences they have around them and kind of build them into those cars. And one of the things that when I finally look back at the 80s, we talked a little bit, and I own Future Shock, right? Steve Connect's car. And that car has like...
And those were huge influential cars for me and for everybody else that was into bugs. All those cars were huge.
Yeah, and Bakersfield, those guys came out of Bakersfield just with some wild cars.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny because the VW thing is like this, it's got this image of like the SoCal whatever, but some of the baddest Volkswagens have been built outside of Southern California. You know what I mean? You're looking at Buddy Shop there in Arizona. You're looking at the stuff that you were doing, the stuff coming out of Bakersfield. There's even stuff out of the East Coast back in those days, the ZZ Top Bug and some stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And there's just a lot of cool trends. And that's why I think that the VW platform is such a cool platform for a build off, because it's just a neutral thing that you could do. And
but if there's no rules, like you could do to it whatever you want, only within that budget, I think it would be it'd be very interesting to see what would be built. I think also, growing up and doing VWs, you looked forward to the next Hot VWs magazine, the next VW trends,
right?
Just so you can see like the show coverages and the featured cars. and that just kept you amped, right? You just had those handy,
Right.
and you looked over 'em. I mean, you get them monthly, but you had like 4 fucking weeks. You looked at every fucking word in that magazine and every picture several times, and you waited for the next one. The other thing you waited for was like the Bug-O-Rama or any other World of Wheels or some other event.
Yeah.
Where you get to see other people's stuff that being built. So I think if you were to do some sort of build off, I think it'd be important they don't post any pictures on social media, because my own projects, I try not to post. Like right now, and I'm building a Dodge A100 pickup, and I've been building it for 12 years.
Yeah.
12, 13 years now. And I'm just just finishing the paint work. It's a very radical build, but I'm just not going to post any pictures till it's finished, because there's nothing better. I mean, that was one of the driving things you had, was going to a show and seeing what was new and what, nowadays with social media, it just dilutes everything, right?
No, it does. I've talked about that before. It's you get so much overexposure before the car is even debuted. When people see it, it's kind of lackluster. Like, yeah, I seen it. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think you got a point there that makes sense with respect to overexposure of certain things, especially if you're building something custom and wild.
right.
And I think that would be a huge treat, right? To be able to, if there was something like that, and then everybody debuted those cars at one specific location, I think it would be phenomenal to see what they could build, especially if they had no choice but to be resourceful. Because when you look at so many things, we did a podcast with Gary Emery, and Gary Emery is the he's the father of Rod Emery, but the son of Neil Emery, which is a famous hot rod builder, right? Out of Burbank. Now, when they built they built the first Baja Bug. And the first Baja Bug, they bobbed the front and the rear. They took front fenders, flipped them around, put them on the rear. They did all these hot rod tricks that ended up creating the first Baja Bug built. And then it's like the influence of hot rodding has always, and true hot rodding, and I hate to use that term, right? Because it all depends. If you're a guy with Brill cream in your hair and dirty jeans and they're cuffed real tough, that's a different, those guys have a different version of hot rodding. But truly hot rodding, it started from kids that didn't have money, wanted to go fast, and they had to be resourceful. So, they take the caddy motors, they do whatever they could, and it was like whatever would work to go faster and look cool is what they did. And I think that's such a huge driving force in the origins of the VW community, because
it was very much the same. It was what you can afford, and you could do. Honestly, nowadays they take, and this was unheard of when I in the 80s. You just didn't have a slice of shit bug that you slammed onto the ground and leave it. I mean, you always worked on it. You worked on getting the paint done and shit like that. I mean, nowadays the patina thing is really big and all that. But
I'm not a huge patina guy myself.
I'm not either. I mean, I would never drive a car in primer. You just didn't do it, right? So, you took the time and you made the commitment of stripping the body and getting it and having it all painted before you'd ever have it on the road again. But and the other thing nowadays is everything is available. I mean, you can just look on the internet and they make it new, right? So it just made it so much easier to put a car together. Like back when we were building these, you're at the junkyard. I mean, whatever you can find and use at the wrecking yard is what you'd use.
Yeah, I think if you talked about, like we were saying, if you talked about a build off with Volkswagens, you'd have to put the criteria that you can only repurpose stuff that's built for another vehicle.
Right.
I think that.
Yeah, I mean if you set the rules like that, like I said, it'd be very interesting how they come out.
Yeah, I think you would see true creativeness come out there, because there's also, and I think that the most unhinged time for that, especially in the VW hobby, was the 80s. You know, in the 80s,
Yeah.
it was like anything goes. I was telling you about Future Shock, my car. That car's got, you know, the one that Steve built. It's got power windows.
Mhm.
It's chopped 4 inches. It's got French headlights, French tail lights. It's got
Yeah.
custom built bumpers. It's got, I mean, so custom dash with the center console that they were making.
Mhm.
You know, there's
Yeah.
so much stuff in there. And I think the only store bought thing was, besides the wheels, was the seats that are Corolla seats, and then they've been
Yeah.
all reupholstered. So it's like you look at you look at these guys, and they had kind of a blank slate, and thought, okay, well, I'm keeping it within the Volkswagen because it's one thing if it's got to kind of also fit the car too, you know.
Right.
So what have you seen with respect to like the car customization scene that's really you like now better now than you did back then with respect to some of the stuff you're seeing built now?
I have a love-hate relationship with the quality. It's like the quality, everybody, I mean, the bar is getting so fucking far up. And a guy like Buddy Hale or Dave Lane, any of these guys that build these cars that look like they're carved out of a complete chunk of acrylic. I mean, it's outstanding, the quality that they can produce nowadays. And of course, it has a lot to do with technology and what's available, making the job better.
Right.
I see that, and there's really no excuse for bad quality work anymore. But what we were used to back in the 80s, it was all like a wow factor, right? Like bright colors and just radical shit done to these cars.
Mm-hmm.
But there were so many of them, like door gaps didn't matter as much. Nowadays, everything's got to be laser perfect and shit. But that's what people expect. They expect the perfect door gaps because even the cheapest car you buy today has perfect door gaps because of technology.
Right.
So you're so used to that's what you expect. Whatever car you're getting body and paint done, the fit and finish has to be just that. So I see, but on the other hand, it's like I don't mind doing it for a customer because he's paying me to do it. And I take pride in making it like that. But on the other hand, like if I just want a car to bomb around in and don't give a shit, I don't want people to pick apart my door gaps or finish or anything like that. Like I got a 34 3-window now that I drive, and it's beat to shit. I mean, the outside, it's got cracks and blisters and chips, and the doors don't fit where the shit. But I just enjoy driving the shit out of it and beating the hell out of it. Because I'm not worried about it. So
right.
That's where I'm not so crazy about, people are like, oh, it's your own car. I expect to see the perfect gaps and finish and all this shit. Well, that isn't always the case. Sometimes you just want a rag you can beat around in, right?
Yeah.
And that may be why we have the patina cars. Right.
Yeah, I think I have a couple cars that are unrestored, but they're still presentable and decent looking, and I just like it's nice to get something you don't have to sweat where you're parking it and all that kind of stuff. But yeah. I definitely think there's still something about about cars that to me there's some things that are most important to you. What do you think is the most important thing visually when you're looking at a car that just has to make sense? What do you think? I mean, is it paint? Is it stance? Is it like, what is your favorite thing about a car?
I think it's the stance and, which to me, stance includes, wheel and tire size and overall stance. To me, that's what's going to draw you to that car. All the other detail shit you overlook. But if you're not seeing it on social media, but if you're at a show and you see, 10 cars down, this car that automatically catches your eye because, man, that thing just sets so bitchin', I got to go see it. That's what draws me to that car. There's, in my opinion, that's what killed Pro Street. When Pro Street came out in the 70s, 80s, and it was huge during the VW craze in the 80s.
Yeah.
The big name guys you look at their cars and they're fucking slammed, and they look like pro stocks on the street.
Yeah.
And they look so right. And then this whole trend of Pro Street took off, where people would just put big tires underneath and near the rear engine chip, but never lower the car. And then they paint it some hideous pastel color. And it just like hair bands killed metal. I mean, these guys killed Pro Street. It just,
yeah.
That's what happened. So to me, it's stance, I think. And then all the other stuff kind of goes together.
Well, I tell you, I love the pro touring look. Like for me,
right.
But in the same respect, I like things that are unorthodox. So I have, which is the worst car to do pro touring, I have a pro touring look 65 Buick Riviera.
Oh, bitchin'.
And
that'd be good. Are you using the nailhead engine?
I have, so I've got the nailhead engine still in it. And I've got, and I'm trying, and it's a fine line to walk where because the easiest thing to do is slap an LS in it, right? And then have like bulletproof, reliable horsepower. And
yeah, I'm telling you, they make a lot of power for less money. It's amazing.
And but on this car, I started a long time ago, and I've got some Bosey forged wheels on there, 18.8s in the front, 2010s in the rear, and it just has the look to it, but it's like now. The whole thing with that car is I was showing my guy because we're getting ready to put some airbags on it, and I own this car, so I'm a VW guy to the core. And the story behind how I ended up with my Riviera, I'm doing car stereos, and I subscribe to Car Stereo Review, and I get one issue, a 1995 issue, I think it is, and it's got Jimmy Vaughn's lime green Riviera on 54 Skylark cars.
Excellent car.
I see that car, and there's just something about that car. I don't like white walls. I don't like wires. It's got both, and I love this car. I just can't, like, this car's just got such a good look to it. I finally finished my bug, and I go to drag race my buddy who owns a VW shop out in front. I seize the motor up right there, and I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm selling this bug, and I'm buying this Riviera. So I buy my 65 Riviera. It's the most money I'd ever paid for a car at that point. It was $1,200 in a guy's driveway. I saw it there, and I said, that's that car Jimmy Vaughn's got. And so I went up there. I bought this car for $1,200 in 1996, and it's been like been the curse of all cars forever, because it was like a hate purchase, right? So, but the thing, so I'm talking to the guy about the airbags. He's like, yeah, these wheels are just so wide. I said, yeah, but that's what's the best part of the car. Like, the back wheel is so deep that it just looks good. The car sits hunkered down real low, and it's just such a great look. And I love a pro touring look. I love a classic car that looks like it could head to the track. Of course, with an X-frame car, it's awful. And I've recently just been watching a bunch of stuff those maniacs at the Roadster shop do.
Oh, geez, but that's a huge checking account. I mean, that's a lot of fucking money.
If you're starting with a Roadster shop chassis, you're going to build a $200,000 car minimum.
No, I'm betting more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're doing it, if you're doing it yourself, yeah. But if you're paying somebody, it'll go way north of that.
Well, and that's where it kind of starts, right? With car customizing, it's like, well, we blew our wide on this, and the level of this is so high. To do anything less than the next level on paint, on interior, on wheels, on suspension, it's like you can't back off the throttle.
Yeah, snowball. That's what you got to control, that fucking snowball, because it can get fast or big fast. Just like you said, you're going to drop 40, 50 grand on a chassis, and now paint jobs just cost. I can't even afford to paint my own damn car anymore. It just paint materials, everything has just gone through the roof.
I mean, Roadster Shop just came out with a chassis for the OBS trucks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that chassis I think is 30 grand for the OBS trucks, and it's like.
Well, I would never think anybody putting 30 grand into that style of truck, but nowadays nothing unheard of. It's gotten so crazy. Like I say, what sucks is you get a young kid, and I got a couple of them working for me that are in their teens, just out of high school, and there is hope for the younger generation, because these guys, one of the first things that impressed me, they know how to use a clutch. So.
Yeah,
that's huge. But they're trying to get into this just like we were in our teens. And everything is just so damn expensive. Even bugs nowadays. I mean, it used to be you could go pick up a running, driving 365 Beetle for $1,500, but I don't think you can find that anymore. So, all the numbers are a lot bigger. They're still cheaper than building anything else, but these guys are all into, like one of them has this old 4-door BMW, and that's his, to what VWs were to us, that's
Right.
his thing is I'm getting this engine, I'm getting this part, but he's doing the same thing we would do. We would go to the wrecking yard, get different shit, and put together this car. So I think this tuner stuff is all the same as what we did with VWs, and like you said, the hot rodders did with the early Fords back then, because it's all they can do to afford it and make them go fast. And so it's all, I think, relative.
Yeah.
But just so damn expensive nowadays.
Now, I know that you like I know you like the 32 Fords. What is it about those 32 Ford that is so popular with all like the hot rod guys? Is it just because it's the classic one that's there? I mean, what's the draw?
Well, it's more pre-30, 34 and down was huge for them, mainly because they don't weigh anything.
Yeah.
So they're lightweight. You can put a bigger engine in them and be fast as hell. Obviously weight kills horsepower. So that was the whole name of the game back then. Like hot rodding, they started cutting the tops on them to get them out of the wind. And they started stripping them of their fenders and that to make them more lightweight. But it became obviously a styling cue, just like mag wheels. The original mag wheels were Halibran cast magnesium. Ted Halibran came out of the war. In World War II, his job at Lockheed was casting magnesium parts for aircraft, and of course he got into racing he was in racing, but when he got out of racing, or got out of World War II and went into racing, he created the magnesium wheel. Same thing, it was a lightweight thing, and as that wheel, as the designs changed, like the windows in them got bigger because the brakes got better and they needed more cooling, and all that was engineering. I mean, that's all that was. But nowadays it's like the look of that, which is killer, just like a chopped 3-window. That's the look of it. But back when they did it was a purpose type thing. So that's mainly why those guys like those older cars. They were plentiful, they were cheap, they were lightweight, and you could put an engine in them, a big engine in them, and go fast, cheap. So.
Now if you could pick any car to build, and like just to do something completely different of any brand, any kind of car, what car do you think has the leanings to be a super rad custom that you've never really seen anybody dig into?
That's a loaded question, boy. I'd have to, man. Well, there's several, like the Dodge A100, the one I'm building now.
Is that going to be your truck?
It is my truck, yes.
What's going to be drivetrain in it?
Well, it's a AA blown injected dual plug Hemi.
Wow.
Millet block, all aftermarket. So it's roughly, it's going to run on methanol, so it's around 2,500 horsepower. It's set in the bed of the truck. It's backwards through a 2-speed that goes to a V drive in the front. And the whole chassis was built local. Matt Tom, a friend of mine, built a chassis. It's all round chromoly tubing. It's over the top, wicked cool. It all started, Jimmy Smith, back when Rod and Custom was still around, the magazine. They contacted all their artists they use in the magazine, and their assignment was to contact all their favorite builders and ask them what they would build if they had the time and money. And Jimmy called me, and I've always liked Dodge A100 pickups because my dad had one in Ohio and I remember it, and I always was fond of it. So I had this silly idea of putting the engine in the bed and the Enderley scoop coming up and peeking up over the the cab. And then when I was a kid, I'd always do these renderings and send them to Dad. That was, when I lived in Ohio. Well, I always put these spoilers on the roof. So this A100 has the spoilers on the roof and the split spoilers on the bed. And then Jimmy, he threw his ideas in. So when that came out and it was published in Rod and Custom magazine,
Mm-hmm.
I started getting all these phone calls that I should build this thing. And so back in 2000, I think it was 2009, I found a body. And in 2011, started tearing it apart, cutting it apart. And it's, and this, again, back to what you can afford. The chassis costs so damn much money because I'm paying another guy to build it. So now I know what it feels like being on the other side of the counter, right? It's
Right.
like, and this is why it's taken so long because, I'm running a business and making a living, and any extra money I would give to him. And it took him like 6 years to build the chassis, not because he took that long, just because whenever I would get enough money and I would throw it at something stupid, that's why it took so damn long. It was one of those, again, a snowball where you started doing it, but once you got going, I was like, fuck, I'm pregnant with this. So I got to finish it. Right. So
Right.
now I'm finally to a point where I got the body and paint. In fact, the body is in my garage because I don't have any room down at the shop. That's how busy we are. So I'm finishing up all the pinstriping and that on the body here, and then the chassis still at the shop. And I'm trying to get it done for next year, at least try to have it finished and done for next year. So the question is, what would I build?
Yeah.
Man, there's so many cars. Probably something radical. You know what I'd really like to do is like a 40 Ford that's built like a funny car, but on the street. To me, I think that would just be I got a huge thing for early funny cars and early front engine dragsters and shit. So
Yeah.
that type of styling, I just really dig it. So anything with that kind of power and setup, I think you can do that just about to any car and it'll look killer, right?
No, I agree. I agree. Well, I tell you, so I'd love to see you get another Volkswagen one day. And
you know what? I think I will eventually. I just have too many irons in the fire between the A100. I bought last year. I bought a famous top fuel altered. The car's Panic that used to run all the events in California back in like early 70s. Anyhow, the car came for sale. I bought it. It's the original car. I'm going to restore it. So between the Dodge A100 and then this Panic fuel altered car, which I'd like to restore back the way it was and go cackle it.
Yeah.
And once that's done and I have time, I've always been looking for like what year did they make the steel sunroofs? Wasn't it like
64? And so 64 is a small window steel sunroof car.
Yeah, right. So if I can find one of those, if I come across one of them bodies, I'd probably buy it and set it aside and just start collecting parts.
I'll keep an eye out for you.
Yeah, I'd really like to do another lowered Baja, obviously with better quality and better engine and just So
I think that's something that a lot of if people have never seen it, they don't know how cool it could look. And
right.
I think that's one thing that I can't recall the last time I saw a lowered Baja. I think I might have saw a picture of one on Instagram not long ago, but I tell you, it's definitely a cool look, man. And matter of fact, there was one at the Volksworld show in England this last year. That's where I remember seeing one, and it was
all the way in England.
It was super cool. I'll send you some pictures of it so you can know, so you can see because the guy went wild with the paint. So anything, but no, Squeege, man. I mean, Doug, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I think it's awesome. I'm looking forward to next time I'm going to be down in Arizona. I'm going to stop by the shop.
Yeah, definitely do it. Well, I got to announce every other year we do Tacos and Nitro. This year, on November 17th, Friday night of Good Guys, we throw this huge event where we got top fuel cars and it's free beer. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to go see Top Fuel Cars light. But anyhow, it's my big open house every year, and this year is going to be huge. I think I got like 8 fuel cars going to fire off this year.
So you get all these Top Fuel Cars out there, and they just fire them up, and everybody gets the smell of nitro and
nitromethane, and then you have a couple taco trucks. Last time I think we had over 1,000 people. I mean, it spreads throughout the whole industrial park.
And I think that's the same. Is that the same weekend that Dino does the Get Down?
No, he does it on a different weekend.
So, because I know they would do that. The Get Down started the weekend before the Good Guys event,
right?
And so
I would have my event because I've been doing it since 2010. So I remember when Dino's was going at the same time, and like in the middle of the night, I'd get this flood of all these trucks and cars coming in. We're at Dino's, and then came over and finished the night at our place. So
yeah, it's wild. Yeah. Well, I'll try to see if and when's that going to be? It's going to be November 7th, you said?
November 17th. That's the weekend of Good Guys there in Scottsdale.
So Good Guys weekend, head over to Squeeges for some tacos and nitro. Friday night
kickoff party is
before the event. Well, I will definitely I'll put a reminder and I'll announce it on my podcast. Anybody that's going to be out
That'd
there
be awesome.
for those events to stop by and check it out. And who knows, maybe I might get lucky because I think that's 2 weeks after SEMA.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I'll do what I can to be there, man. That'd be awesome.
You're not that far away.
Come down, check it out. No, it's too close not to just take a little cruise down there. So
yeah, that's right.
Well, Doug, man, thanks for all your time, and I look forward to.
It was a good time. I'm glad you let me spew some of my stories I've had with VW, growing up with VWs, and that was a lot of fun.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, maybe I'll be dragging you down a sunroof car, a body.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, brother. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay, you do the same.
I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast because I sure do love finding top quality guys in the automotive restoration industry that started out as Volkswagen dudes, and they're building some of the top level stuff to this day. And a lot of it starts at the genesis of Volkswagen. So to support Let's Talk Dubs, go to letstalkdubs.com, pick up some merch, register for One Crazy Weekend, and get ready for October 6th and 7th at the Orleans Hotel and Casino. It's going to be off the chain. So until next week, guys, later.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.